to welcome you here. We're really glad to see you here today. It seems everyone in the country is dealing with weather or weather-related issues right now. So we certainly are glad you're here, and we do want to send out good thoughts to our friends in Southern California that are dealing with just some horrific fires. And if you haven't lived there and been through Santa Ana wind periods, it's awful any day, and it's certainly awful, the worst perhaps that we've seen. So on that note, we do want to welcome you here. We do have a great topic today. We're going to be talking about all things e-bikes. And we have someone here who is a true e-enthusiast and is I think excited to share with us his thoughts on this. And we definitely want to make this an interactive opportunity for you. So please take advantage of the chat. We'll be watching that. Put your questions in regarding bikes and things like that. And hopefully Lee will be able to answer the question for you. And if you think of something later, you can send it to us and we'll be happy to forward that to him. Um, my name is Bill Bagnall. I am a board member here with Build the Era. And our mission at Build the Era is committing to making the Department of Transportation's role, at least today, in American movement understood by citizens and activating them to engage for smart and equitable investments by DOT. And for today's, especially for better multimodal planning in their communities, which includes bike lanes, divided roadways for bikes and pedestrians. We're really glad you're here today, and thank you for being here to contribute to the attainment of our mission, vision, and living our values. So, without further ado, I want to introduce our speaker, Lee Walzer. Lee, if you're on Team Pete, you recognize Lee very clearly. But if you don't, a little bit of background. Lee is an attorney turned e-bike evangelist. He discovered e-bikes by chance in 2021 by clicking on an ad, and the rest is history. Some of us click on ads and it doesn't go so well, but this one sounds like it was a good decision. Uh, 12,757 miles, and probably much more than that now.
Much more at this point. 13,100 something miles right now, actually.
Oh my gosh. But regardless of the number of miles, he does say it's one of the best decisions he's made. His Rad City Step-Thru bike is named Slayer Pete, continues to get him to the office and around the Washington, D.C. area. Um, and his next goal, if it hasn't already been accomplished, is to get his husband Kevin on an e-bike so they can bike together. He's here to share what we need to know about e-bikes, what you should consider, and of course, your questions. So with that, I'm going to be quiet. Please do put your questions in the chat, and we will go ahead and give the floor to Lee.
Fantastic. Good evening. Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here and talk about what really is my e-bike journey. I suppose I was primed for this, even though it was clicking on an ad in January 2021 that really got me down the rabbit hole. But listening to Pete Buttigieg talk during his campaign at times about the importance of micro mobility started me thinking, and I live in Arlington, Virginia, just outside Washington, D.C. We have metro, we have a good bus system, and it's parts of it are very walkable. The county actually strives for a certain amount of walkability and lately has been promoting a car-free diet. So it was probably literally around this very time 4 years ago that I was reading the Washington Post online and I saw this ad for something called Rad Power Bikes. And I was like, what the heck is this? And I clicked on, and I'm like, wow, an electric bike that can kind of zip you around, but you pedal and you can do all sorts of interesting things with it. And it sent me down this rabbit hole. I started like trying to read, sort of like with when I first discovered Pete Buttigieg, trying to read everything that I could and seeing what was out there in the e-bike universe. I fortunately had a friend who I knew from Pete's campaign who had one, and I tried his. A neighbor at the end of our block also had one, also a rad power bike. But I even rented, an Uber e-bike or something. And I remember there were a couple of those I tried. Those did not go so well. You would look in the app and it would say, this bike is good for about 12 to 18 miles. And I would start pedaling, and within about a mile, the bike had died. And
Mm,
so I thought, okay, but it gave me a sense of what it could do in terms of how e-bikes work and, how you get around. And I also went to a couple of local bike stores. We have a Trek bike store near where I live, and I tried one of those too. And I think when I thought about it at the time, my main concern was, would this become an expensive toy that I would never use? A couple of you who were here at the beginning might have heard, I grew up in Chicago. I hate winter. I've discovered that the only thing that I like more than I hate winter is biking on my e-bike during the winter. But when I first bought it, I thought, oh, I'm going to have to put this thing away between, say, November, certainly March, maybe April, maybe even May. And that went by the wayside really quickly because I discovered, wow, you really can bike around here pretty much year round. Right now, I cannot because we are pretty inundated with snow and the roads are not yet clear. But I'll tell you, as I started to think about this, okay, I thought, well, will I use it? And I liked Rad is like I always analogize it, and I'm not here to promote them. There are plenty of e-bike companies in similar price point. I analogize it to a solid Chevy or Ford. You can spend up to, I have seen e-bikes for $10,000, fancy European manufacturers. And I've seen them around here in the DC area too. And so I'll go up to people and they do look really nice. But I think to myself, no, I do not need that much bike. And I thought to myself, this is, at the time it was $1,500 for this bike. And I thought, well, let's try it out. And I hope it doesn't go the way of the exercise bike that we have in the basement that we never really use. Fortunately, that wasn't the case at all. Um, so there's a lot of things you need to consider when you're going to buy an e-bike. I thought to myself, um, I want to use it to go to work because I work in Washington, D.C. It's about 10 miles from where I live. And I thought, instead of driving, which is what I was doing, we have a now adult son, but there was that period of years of running around in the car all the time. And I thought, I'd rather bike to work than drive because traffic around here can be pretty awful at times. And so I started to look, there's bike trails and mixed use trails, and there's even bike lanes. And then I thought, well, okay, where am I going to store it? This is another consideration because lots of homes in this area do not have garages. We have a shed, uh, all year round secure shed. That's where I store it. But I thought to myself, I don't think my husband's going to be too happy with me if I'm trying to wheel this bike into the house because they're heavy. And where am I going to put it anyhow? That's not doable. So having a place to store it was another factor. And then, well, I want to commute on it. And I suppose I also want to use it for exercise. And again, we have this great network of trails. Every day on my commute to work, I bike along the Potomac River. I see the Jefferson Memorial. I see the Lincoln Memorial. As I'm coming into DC, I can see the Capitol. It's really it's beautiful. And there are miles and miles of trails going all the way down to Mount Vernon, that was George Washington's home. So even before this, like when I first moved to DC, I had a regular bike and I used to bike a lot when I was younger. And I would bike 30 miles to Mount Vernon and back on a weekend. And I didn't even think twice about it. And I physically could do it. I thought to myself, well, the e-bike, having that battery assist will get me to work faster. It's not that I couldn't use a regular bike to go to work. I think I could. Even the hills would be a pain going home, and they're even a pain on the e-bike, but I could have done it. But it's more just the time involved that I can get to work usually within about 35 minutes going 10 miles. And that's, I have measured it at times. There have been times it's taken me maybe 5 to 7 minutes more by e-bike than it would have taken by car. Usually we're talking about 10 or maybe even 15 minutes more, but that's a good trade-off. So those were some of the things that went through my mind as I was considering buying one. Oh, and the last thing is, where am I going to park it if I do take it to work? I work for a government agency and we lease space. It's not like the Pentagon or something like that or some huge old building, but there's a commercial building with a garage and they actually have bike racks. So that problem was solved too, because I thought to myself, I don't really want to leave it out on the street all day, even locked up. Probably not a good idea. Garage, problem solved. So anyhow, from there, it was really simple. I knew what I wanted it for, mainly to commute and kind of to get around and do some errands. I sometimes go to the dry cleaners. I have biked home with a case of wine from Trader Joe's, these very stereotypical DC types of things that I can kind of laugh about. But, I put a big front basket on the bike and I put my work backpack in there. I have carried wine home. I've carried groceries home. It also has a rear rack that you can strap things to. So I'm pretty covered to the extent if I ever want to do errands. I used to run for like pet medication or pet food to McLean, Virginia to pick up stuff for our then pug. And so I used it a lot for things like that. But there's a lot of different types of e-bikes. I'm going to quickly try and I bought what's called a commuter e-bike. It's like it sounds. It's like kind of you sit upright, it's two wheels. There are cargo or utility bikes. If anyone here has ever been to the Netherlands, you see these bikes, they're called they translate from Dutch like box bikes. They have a big cargo box in the front of them. And the Dutch, they put kids in there, they put pets, they put groceries. And you also have them here. I've seen them around here, but also equally common is kind of where it's a longer rear rack and that you can put child seats on. You can also strap cargo to. And I sometimes still think of getting one of those. It's like a second e-bike, but I have not. Then there's like, if you're short on space, if you live, say, in an apartment building, there are e-bikes that you can fold. There's a hinge and they fold, so they're much easier to store. And then there's kind of wider tire trail bikes. There's a lot of people, and I see this in Facebook groups I'm on. There are people who like e-bikes. They go out in nature, they get exercise. And I certainly do some of that. I use paved trails on the weekend, but there are people who really like to go off trail and just get around for recreation and the thrill of it. So that's another kind of e-bike. Then you have to think about, and it depends partly what your state laws are. There's three different classes of e-bikes. There's class one, which those bikes can go up to 20 miles an hour. They do not have a throttle. Class two, which is what I have, can go up to 20 miles an hour and does have a throttle. I'll get to the throttle in a minute. And then there's class three, which can go up to 28 miles an hour. And some states have rules on this. Others I don't think do. When I got my bike, the guy who assembled it, of course there's a computer involved with it. My bike, I call it a class 2.5. It actually can go up to 25 miles an hour. He manipulated it to get it to run a little bit faster, which I actually appreciate a lot of times because I easily get into the low 20s. And when I first had the bike going down hills, I a couple times would break 30, but that's not pedaling. But at the beginning, pedaling, I would get about I could get into the low 20s easily. And so that's a nice, reasonable speed, I think. Then, as I said, there's a question, this people either love throttles or think that they detract from the beauty of e-bikes. Say you're stopped at an intersection. Throttle, you kind of twist this thing, and if you're at a dead stop and you're on a bike that mine weighs 65 pounds, and that's before the basket and before my work gear and everything. So I'm carting around like 70 something pounds when I'm commuting to work. And if you're at a dead stop, trying to pedal that is not necessarily so easy, even with the motor. The throttle kind of gives you that start.
Hmm.
And there are people, I see this on, again, in e-bike groups. There are people who are older, who've had knee replacements, and they can't get around as well. There are people who like to use the throttle just to get around. I pedal my bike. I do not use the throttle to really get around, but it is practical when you are at a dead stop. Um, the technology for bikes has improved a lot. The battery range is longer. Currently, my bike, I would say, gets about roughly I can get about low 30s on a single charge. I think when I first had it, I could probably get into the high 30s, maybe even 40. The battery technology, as we know with things like computers and cell phones, it's changed for the better. You can definitely get more range now. Some people even buy two batteries, have an extra battery that they cart around so that they can go really far if they're taking a long weekend trip. I am definitely limited distance wise. I would not try to bike to Mount Vernon, all the way to Mount Vernon today. I could easily make it there. I'm not sure I would make it home. So, and I have pedaled the bike without where the battery has lost power or something. It's a lot of so
Lee, can I ask you, real quick on that topic? When we talk about EVs, vehicles, range anxiety is usually a concern that people have. Uh, is that something that you think about as well then in your go and fronting?
I don't really because I know that my commute, I'll tell you, there's basically, I have there's a screen, a display on the bike, and it shows you how much battery you have left. And it'll show up to 5 bars. At the end of the day, I still have 4 bars.
Hmm.
But however, there's a part of my commute home where there's a lot of hills and I'm using a bit more battery assist. It'll dip easily to 3 at times, and sometimes I've dipped to 2, depending on the weather. Also, like EVs, you hear these horror stories. EVs don't work in the winter. Your car will die because they're not meant for cold. There is some difference in battery performance in the winter, I would say. And maybe not even so much battery. I can't say like, oh, my bike is, yeah, I still have the same amount of battery power at the end of the day, but I think, the effort that you have to put in a bit more effort when it's cold. The bike isn't delivering quite as much juice when it's really cold out as it does when it's warmer.
Hmm.
I definitely have noticed a difference.
Interesting.
So, but again, I know what I use it for. And so there isn't that I don't have that fear. I know there's a couple of bike groups around that I've thought of going with, and depending on where they're starting, because I don't have a rack on my car. There are people who like to strap their e-bikes to the back of the car and go off on weekend trips somewhere. That's not why I bought the bike, at least as long as my husband is not joining me on these e-bike excursions. There's no point in putting a bike rack, and you need a special bike rack because, again, they're heavy. So I haven't done that, but some people like to, take their bikes, but I'm limited. I could not head out to say Reston, Virginia, on my bike and then go on a further bike ride and expect to get anywhere close to getting home again. I would definitely run out of battery. And I suppose one solution would be to buy a second battery if I really wanted to do that. But so far, I haven't felt the need to do so.
Right.
Um, so that's again, the class of e-bike that you get, and now I've seen, including by my bike manufacturer, where you can choose the class. You can alternate between classes of bike, some of the newer models. You could, if you want your bike to go up to 28 miles an hour, you can, play around with the compute easily, adjust the settings in the computer, and suddenly you will get that additional power. And that's kind of neat, actually. I've thought of that. There's also what's called, and I'm not expert on all the tech stuff, cadence, which is what I think my bike has. It'll, depending on how much battery power it'll you use, what setting you put it on, it'll give you that much boost versus a torque sensor, which the more you pedal, the harder you pedal, the more speed you will build up. It's more supposedly more natural.
Hmm.
I haven't really noticed a difference. I don't know. I've never really ridden a torque sensor e-bike, and I have an older one at this point. But theoretically, that sounds appealing because supposedly with a cadence sensor, yeah, you could pedal harder, but it's only going to get you so much more output. Whereas a torque sensor, the harder you pedal, the faster I think you will go.
Hmm.
Um,
Interesting.
Another thing that new models almost universally have, even inexpensive ones like mine, hydraulic disc brakes. Mine came with, think of like your basic 10-speeder mountain bike. You press it, it's like, and you've got brake pads. And I have not had an issue, but in wet weather, inclement weather, you have to be careful. And there are days where if it's wet out and I put the brakes on, it will really squeak. You'll hear this. And it also doesn't, hydraulic disc brakes supposedly will stop an e-bike much more efficiently and much more safely than the basic brakes that I have. I haven't had issues with it, but I think if I ever upgrade my e-bike, that'll be the feature that I'm most looking forward to is having hydraulic brakes because they're pretty universal at this point. And then I think another cost thing that determines cost, how much does your bike weigh? My bike is, like I said, 65 pounds. There are lighter models. You pay more for that, I think. And I was discussing this earlier before the chat started. I'm not a physics person or a math person. There's definitely some equation out there that could determine, okay, if I had a lighter e-bike, even if it had a smaller motor and a slightly less powerful battery, would the output be the same? Would I actually be going faster than if I'm, pedaling this 70 plus pound bike with a very strong motor and a very powerful battery? I'm not sure how that works out, but I'm sure there is a mathematical formula for determining whether this would really make a difference or not. But having a light bike, sometimes if you lose power, yeah, walking that bike up a hill or something, if it's heavy, is hard. It would be nice to have a lighter bike, but you tend to pay more for that. And then,
Can you
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I wanted to ask you, one of the questions we got earlier before today's thing was, the logistics. And I think if you're going from home to work, route, the distance, how the bike is not so big an issue. But if you want to take the bike, let's say on a weekend, do some errands and things like that, charging it. If you go to a Starbucks, can you charge it? And
You
what does
could
it look
actually.
like?
You take, again, it depends. This is another variable. And it's actually, I'll segue into that really quickly. Soon after I bought the bike, we were out in Seattle for vacation. And there was a Dutch bike manufacturer called Van Moof that had this fancy showroom in downtown Seattle. And I remember going in, and the bike at the time was they probably cost in the low 2200s. The battery did not come off the bike. The battery was internal to the bike and you either had to have a garage with an outlet or you would have to have it in take the whole bike in with you to charge. Whereas most e-bikes, the battery, whether it's like mine, purely external or what they call semi-integrated or even integrated, where there's a little hatch that you open that you can take out the battery. So yes, you could take the battery into Starbucks. And I will say though that the charging period, at least on mine, even though I'm using, at least according to the bike, only 1 bar, I still have 4 bars out of 5 left at the end of the day. To charge that bike back up at this point, it takes easily 3, even 4 hours, I would say.
Oh,
It's not like, and I've been in EVs a couple times where you stop for 20 minutes and you actually get a decent charge that you can continue to go and not have to worry it'll get you the rest of the way or even fill you most of the way up again. E-bikes, at least mine, it takes a while to charge in my experience, and that's just mine. So that's something to think about too. But you could, I mean, I think I could go marginally farther. I think if I was to go sit somewhere, say have a coffee for half an hour, 45 minutes, it would probably improve my range a decent amount, but I would not like double my range or something
okay.
like that. I still would have to be conscious of that. Uh,
Right.
Another thing, I bought my bike. Rad is almost entirely, they have a few bike stores, but they're mostly an online retailer. And there's another company, my neighbors across the street actually bought 2 e-bikes from this company called Aventon. It's the same thing. They will ship you the bike and you will assemble it or you will pay somebody to assemble it. I am not good at my all that good with my hands, and I'm not, a mechanical person at all. So at the time, and this was also another factor why I bought from Rad, they had an actual presence here with like a mobile bike service. And someone came out to the house, they built the bike, and I'm convinced that's why it's lasted as long because, I read, including on the Rad, people buy these bikes, they put it together. Oh, they're having this issue, that issue. And, sometimes there are issues with quality, I think. And I think I got particularly lucky, but I think having someone who knew what they were doing assemble it does make a difference. And I do not regret the $150 or $200 I spent to have somebody assemble it.
I see Jan has her hand raised, and I think she's got something to say about this too. I should say Laura.
But
I'm looking at Jan, but it's
That's
Laura's
okay.
hand.
That's all right. I don't mind being confused with Jan because she's smarter than me.
Oh,
So there you go. So the I have a Blix bike that I bought. It's also tends to be kind of this commuter type style bike. Um, and I hired it. There's a company called VeloFix,
yes.
and VeloFix is a national company. They show up at your house in a van. And the nice thing about them too is that they now have you in their system. And so you get like a reminder, like this is the last time you serviced your bike and this and the other thing. So those are the things that I would say. I think I'm going to just jump in with a question that someone had here. It's a Jan put into like e-bikes banned from some bike trails and that sort of thing. Every state I think is different. Like here in Massachusetts, you can't ride. Technically, you cannot ride an e-bike on a bike laned on a bike trail. Okay.
Is
Uh,
that the case? I think there's a lot of misconceptions around this. And,
no,
you
it's
know,
actually a law in
is it,
Massachusetts.
there's similar
So,
laws. I don't, it's a
yeah,
question though, lawyer, like how do you interpret the
yeah.
law? Is it really meant to encompass? I understand like why they don't want even mopeds, let alone
Mhm.
motorcycles.
Right.
But basically, as I've said to some people, because I know people who think that e-bikes are kind of a nuisance, I have been passed many times by what I call conventional or analog cyclists who are
Mm.
on racing bikes and who are in great shape and those bikes can go really fast. I have been passed many times and I don't think having the motor makes that much noise even. And
No,
so
I don't
I
think
think
it's a
it's a
noise.
question of how they're interpreted because here too, on the Mount Vernon Trail, there's signs, no motorized vehicles, but I don't think they interpret it to include at this point e-bikes, or else there's lots of scofflaws like myself.
Yeah. Well, I think that one
It
of the
is
things that I would
refreshing.
recommend though is that here, most states have bicycle organizations. And here in Massachusetts, there's a very strong bicycle and e-bike organization that work together in terms to try to change the law and making sure that it's clear and how to be what you don't want to see is people be the cause of something being taken away. And so those are the things that I think is something to pay attention to. Bigger issue, I think, from a safety standpoint on the batteries is making sure that your battery is actually a new and well tuned in battery. There have been some fires that have been caused by repurposed batteries. And so making sure you don't have a damaged battery. Um, One of the things that's problematic at some um, places of work is they do not allow the batteries attached to the bike inside a building, out of fear that it would cause a fire, and that includes e-scooters, e-bikes, etc. Um, my place of work allows you to bring the battery in, not plugged into the bike. And I actually have done that because it actually precludes someone from wanting to steal the bike. So I have my battery with me, I plug it in, and it keeps people from wanting to steal the bike because it's not connected.
Yes. I was actually going to talk a little bit about the whole e-bike fire issue. From what I understand, a lot of cases, it's sometimes a bad battery, but also people use mismatched chargers that are not meant to work with that battery. You always use your bike manufacturer's charger. You don't buy an off-market charger. And better news, I think more and more big e-bike companies are having their batteries UL certified. Mine, my company does offer a newer battery now that is UL certified, but it already, and my current one does not. My battery does not have that, but it has an EU certification. And so far, I use only the charger that came with the bike, and I've been lucky. But yes, you don't want to store it near heat. Believe me, I think about this a lot. I tend not to charge it if I'm going to be out of the house, if no one's going to be home. On the other hand, where do I usually charge it? In our bedroom, but away from, a heat vent or something. And again, the bike, I may upgrade the battery in the next year or so, but I've not had issues with it. And I think most of the issues are from people using mismatched chargers or bad off-market batteries that were not meant to go with a particular brand of e-bike. But it is very much, it does happen.
Why would somebody, what would happen? I presume when you buy the bike, you get a charger.
Yes, but if you think about it, especially say people who are like using them as delivery vehicles, they might be buying a secondhand bike. The parts may have changed,
Hmm.
or a battery died, and then they just go buy some cheap battery.
Okay.
And so that's how I think that can often happen, or people trying to save money. Oh, I don't want to spend, the batteries aren't cheap. The batteries are a good chunk of the cost of the bike. If I was to buy a new battery, it would be about right now, unless they have a sale, about $500.
Hmm.
So that's a quarter to a third of the value of my bike. It's probably the most expensive component on the bicycle, actually. So
What is the life of a battery? How many charges can you expect to get out of it?
I should have looked at I know the answer to this. I should have gotten out my manual. I think I've exceeded the number of charges actually, because I hear people, oh, my battery has not lasted. And I'm going 3.5+ years of pretty intensive use actually. And
Hmm.
my battery, there is some degradation in performance, I think, but not enough that I'm ready to, I've gotten more fit in the process. I think if I had had this performance at the beginning, I'm not sure what I would have thought about it, but because I ride so much, it's like, okay, so I'm getting a little bit more of a workout than maybe would have been the case at the beginning because
Okay.
I have to put a little bit more effort into it at this point, but not so much that it really makes a difference. And I do use it as fitness as well as transportation. So
If you don't mind me asking you kind of a practicality question. You get on your bike in the morning, you leave home, you're going to work. Um, without sounding too personal, when you get to work, are you a sweaty mess? Are you,
that's a very good question. My building also has a gym, and for my agency, it's free. So I actually go in. There are mornings I arrive, I'm not that sweaty. It depends on the time of the year.
okay,
Obviously, in summer, I sweat more, but sometimes even in the winter, I arrive sweaty. But there's that kind of ideal period in the late fall or something, or if it's not too cold out, but not really warm well, yeah, I carry deodorant. I put on deodorant. I'm not a sweaty mess, but there are days I arrive and I'm a sweaty mess and I shower.
okay,
So yeah,
okay.
that
So I'm
was
just
another
thinking,
one actually. I forgot to. That was something else I thought about. Well, what am I going to do when I get to work?
right?
Kind of thing. And for a lot of people, that is an issue. I'm lucky that that is not an issue for me, and so
Okay,
it makes commuting really practical.
yeah. Um, if you were for anybody here, well, like me, who's just kind of starting their bike search, could you tell us maybe what the top three, what you would tell me if we were friends, must-haves that you must have in this new bike?
Okay, you have to have this is great. You are like anticipating all these things I was thinking about
Oh,
talking
good.
about. You need a helmet that has what's called MIPS certification. It's not just a regular bike helmet because you
Oh,
are going usually at a higher speed than you would on a typical bicycle. So you need more protection if you have a crash. I would
is that
say
MIPS?
MIPS.
MIPS?
Yes, MIPS. And so you definitely need that. I would say must and the helmet, oh, the helmet also should have lights on it. Mine has turn signal. I have turn signal capability built into it. And those things, yes. It's called the brand of helmet I have is called Lumos. And they sell like a little thing that you attach to the handlebar and it's like Bluetooth. And so you click it like left, right, and your helmet will blink turn signals so that people
Oh,
know which way you're going as opposed to hand signals. The other thing, and these I don't think you need to buy because I'm pretty sure it is standard with almost any e-bike out there that you would buy, a bell or even a horn. Um, because this is my biggest pet peeve is analog cyclists who do not have bells on their bikes and often do not even have reflectors and or very little in the way of reflectors and can be hard to see. And they'll be like on your left, and I actually have a whistle. The neighbor across the street, the wife gave me a whistle because people do not, you'd be amazed at the number of people who do not hear a bell. I have been pedaling, particularly when I'm going home. There's an area of DC called the Wharf, and there's a paved trail for pavement for bikes, and then there's even signs periodically that show pedestrians here, bicycles here. People ignore it, especially tourists who are not used to, who maybe come from places where people do not bike nearly as much as they do in DC. And there have been many times I'm right behind them, like ding, ding, no reaction whatsoever. So the whistle gets a reaction from people.
okay.
And oh, the final thing that you need are good locks. People do
Locks.
steal e-bikes. And this is like, I'm not a paranoid person, trust me, but I have a rear wheel lock I have even a chain that attaches to the rear wheel lock. I don't usually go around with that. I have a U-lock and I have a folding lock. Plus, I bought like a cheap alarm off of Amazon. It's very visible. And, if I activate that thing and if someone even jostles the bike, it'll start to make a lot of noise.
Hmm.
I think if you're going to park it somewhere to do errands, you need that because people do steal them. And I typically will take my battery off, but I'm not sure. I think Laura was saying, well, people won't want the bike without the battery. I'm not so sure because sometimes the batteries can be, people buy an off-market battery and just stick it on there and resell the bike frame even. So I think and I do take the battery with me almost all the time unless I'm literally going in somewhere for just a couple minutes and I can kind of see the bike. And I have a carrying case for it
Mhm.
because, yeah, people do steal them. And I think you need to think about that when you're going out, if you're going to use it to do errands, depending on where you're going.
Great, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Tracy asked a question here, and about what are your thoughts on people with disabilities being able to use e-bikes? She shares, something like Parkinson's, where balance can become an issue. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a good question. Actually, there are now e-tricycles, which I think would solve a lot of the balance issues, actually. And the company, my e-bike company, I don't know if they had an e-trike actually, and they do exist. I've seen other brands of them, and I think that's actually a great way for people to get around. I think if you have balance, and depending on the bike you buy in terms of weight and stuff and are able to handle it, then you can, I think you can use a throttle, for example, to help you, certainly to help you get going. And even if you're tired, you just don't have, your legs might not have the same power, that you could use the throttle to get around and enjoy the outdoors or to do errands that way.
Hmm. Hmm. Um, Jonathan asked about your thoughts about licensing for e-bikes given the speeds that they get to. What are your thoughts there?
I am fully supportive of it. And I'm going to talk about my own safety do's and don'ts and everything because I've had my share of experiences, as when I was making notes to myself, I wrote accidents happen. And I actually do believe that people should be required to have a license. I think regular bicyclists would even benefit from having to, in many cases, go through, some basic tests. I mean, it's not quite the same, but despite the story I will tell you at the end, I treat my bike pretty much like a motor vehicle. It is powerful. It's heavy, so it can potentially hurt somebody if you collide with them. And I do think that safety really is important and that not everybody that you should have basically to use a Pete Buttigieg phrase, rules of the road, that people need to be familiar with the rules of the road before getting on an e-bike. And you need to be careful and you need to really think about what you're doing.
Given the fact that you are going faster than a traditional bike, for those of us that do ride, that are analog riders, which is my new favorite term, describe for us what it's like to go down the street at a faster clip, and do you feel safe? And
This is an excellent question. I think again, my bike has 5 levels of battery assist. When I go to work in the morning, I'm usually riding in level 2, which is like eco level. Level 1 is also eco. I typically am in level 2, and there's a stretch that starts out downhill. I can go a good mile just pedaling even, for about a mile without any battery assist. Going home, So I'm averaging, I would say my average speed going into work is around 16, 17 miles an hour. I am not doing plus 20 miles the whole way. I can tell you when the bike was new and fresh and the battery had that much more oomph to it. Going downhill, I could get up to about 30 when I'm not pedaling, just from the coasting, and coming off, starting off pedaling and then going down. I was sometimes 30, 31 miles an hour. That's kind of scary. I'm not a speed demon.
Mhm.
And that can feel a little scary actually. And I'm very aware of that. So the thing is, though, as I mentioned, I have been passed by plenty of very fit, regular cyclists. And I think, I have a bell, I use it. I'm not wearing earbuds. I see certainly plenty of joggers. Earbuds are another pet peeve of mine at this
Mm.
point. And I understand why people want, especially if they're jogging or walking, they want to listen to music or a podcast or what have you. Great. But on bicyclists in particular, I just like it annoys me a lot. And I don't think it should be allowed. I think it's very dangerous actually. And I've seen my share of bicyclists with earbuds who do not hear a bell.
Yeah,
So,
I we certainly see that. I want to give you time. We have about 10 minutes left, and
okay.
I feel like there's a safety talk coming.
Oh, there definitely is a safety talk coming. Okay, first of all, there are like the basic, the bike is heavy. So I have there, especially at the beginning, I would be suddenly starting up a hill, but I was in low level of battery assist, and you can not stall out because your bike isn't going to stop, but you're not generating enough power to get up that hill, and you do tip over. I have tipped over that way a couple times. The second safety thing is e-bikes and wet wooden surfaces do not go well. I have had a couple of wipeouts. There's part of the Mount Vernon Trail where there's um, near this place area called Roosevelt Island, and there's a beautiful wooden bridge with planks, and it's creaky and everything. And even at a and there are speed limit signs saying, you should not exceed 10 miles an hour. And I'll say, okay. So I was doing maybe 15 miles an hour. I have wiped out, seemingly going straight. It's just like not even trying to turn or something like that. So it can be, and I have like the scratches on my knees. My husband made me get knee pads, which I now do wear. And then, this talk about safety is very on topic because on Monday, December 30th, coming home, I had a bike accident, not a wipeout, an actual accident that I'm not exactly sure. I can't tell you what happened. I didn't black out, but I think the stress of it, it's like I can't tell you exactly what happened. And I'm fine, actually. I'm sitting here. I have a couple of little scrapes, but actually right in here, I think I pulled a chest muscle. The next thing I knew, I was like on the sidewalk with my bike, and I got up, driver had stopped. Are you okay? Are you okay? I'm like, yeah, he took my name and number. I didn't have quite the presence of mind to get his, but I got up and it was fine. I was prepared. I was going to continue riding home. And then I realized, oh, the chain derailed. And if there's time, I'll talk about the mechanics of e-bikes. But getting a chain, I'm not the most mechanical person. Getting the chain back on an e-bike is not always that easy. So I walked it to the Smithsonian Metro Station, got it to the nearest metro station. My husband picked me up. I parked it in a bike cage there overnight because I just didn't want to deal with it. It's only then I told my husband, oh, I had like a little bike accident. And I got to the metro station. I said, well, this is what happened. He's like, do you want to go to the ER? I said, I feel fine overall, except for like right in here. And I still have like some muscle soreness. But I checked out completely fine. And, if you looked at me, you wouldn't think I had a bike accident, but that was the worst thing. And the bike is fine, aside from the chain. I've got my bike mechanic. I use like Rad now has I've used Velofix, and they're good. I use like a guy who has like his own little bicycle business, and he comes out to the house and he's going to do a tune-up. He's going to put on a new chain, and there's some other. The bike has 13,000 plus miles. It needs a couple new parts, I think, too, to run a little bit better. So I'm going to do that. But the bike is basically, you wouldn't know the bike had been in an accident because I always say to people, the thing is built like a tank. And I'm grateful for that, actually.
Mhm.
So again, I said earlier, I do treat it generally like a motor vehicle. Those of us who drive, sometimes, you make driving mistakes too. And I probably was trying to cross against traffic at like an exit ramp, and I'm not sure what happened. And I clearly was not struck head on because I don't think I'd be talking to you this way. I don't think I would look nearly as good as I do. But it did drive home to me once again that, yeah, you have to be careful with these things. Accidents do happen. And you could say the same about anything. You drive a car, you ride a regular bike, stuff happens. You don't anticipate it, you don't expect it, but it does happen. And, you need to drive defensively above all.
That's great advice. You just mentioned something that triggered another question. Someone here in the chat asked, what's the life expectancy of this of an e-bike investment, if you will? You just mentioned you have 13,000 miles on yours. Sounds like with some tune-ups or whatever that you can continue on.
Yeah, and this is the guy who comes out to do tune-ups on my bike, he's amazed. He said, I've never met anybody who has a bike from this company with that many miles on it. And I
Really?
like there's a Facebook page for Rad Power Bikes owners. And there are some people who have like 20,000 miles who've had their bikes for a while. I think if I keep getting some new parts, that the bike will keep going. There's no real reason why the bike will not. I'll probably need a new battery at some point. And I just ordered a new e-bike controller, though I'm not gonna, which is like kind of what makes the computer stuff, which, has the motor communicating with the battery and all this stuff. And I have it just in case because it's an older model at this point.
Mhm.
Rad, like any company, they keep coming out with newer models, and it's a question, will I be able to get the parts in another year or two? So I did just buy a new controller. Maybe I would buy a new motor as well. But the tires have held up really well, except for a couple flats. And pretty much everything is in really good shape still. And all I do, again, I'm not mechanical. I either degrease the chain periodically or I grease the chain. I clean it up a little bit. And I charge the battery regularly. I tend to, and there's debate about this. Do you charge the battery after every ride? I tend to. Some people say, no, you should let the battery drain. I'm like, I'm not sure that's the case, actually. There's a lot of debate about what the best way, like as with EVs, as with your phone battery, what's the best way to keep the battery going? My battery is still doing really well, and I charge it after pretty much every ride.
Well, that's good to know. We have just a couple minutes left, and if anyone has any questions, go ahead and throw them in here. But one of our, as we said at the top of the talk here, part of what we do at Build the Era is advocacy. And I'm curious with you as an evangelist and you as a lawyer, you have two hats that sort of dovetail. Have you found yourself doing any advocacy for biking infrastructure?
There's actually I have a little bit. I've written letters, and there's actually a letter I need to write. There's an intersection. I go down a regular street, parts of which have a bike lane, but it crosses at a particular intersection about third of a mile, maybe before I get to the bike trail that I get on in the morning. In the morning, it's easy, and there's like a little one of those crosswalks that's off to the side that with a little pedestrian stop. Sometimes cars will stop for a bike. It's also, I think the whole intersection needs to be painted that cars should stop because it's off to the side. And when you're on a bike in particular, particularly if I'm going home and I'm on the other side of the street, kind of crossing over, it's not good. It wouldn't connect you to where you need to go. So they need to do something with that intersection. And I'd actually written the county, but the road that it intersects with is apparently a state-owned road. So I actually keep meaning to write our state delegate and state senator, and this is something I really have to do in the new year.
Good,
So I
good.
have done a little bit. There's a bike advisory committee in Arlington. I've attended a couple of their meetings. If I had a little more time, I completely, my hat's off to people who advocate, because there's so many technical steps and so many studies. You don't just, oh, we want this and it happens. There's all these things have to happen. So the whole advocacy piece, I think in a few years when I retire, I probably will do more, because we have really good bike infrastructure, I think, compared to most parts of the United States. I think we're rated a gold rated. I forget the ratings. I don't know if we're platinum in Arlington, Virginia, but we're
Okay.
certainly, I think, gold, and considered one of the best cities for biking, and at least better cities for biking in the US. But there's more that could be done, actually. There always is.
There always is. There always is. Well, it's 4:58 and Lee, I really wanted to thank you. This is like having that friend that really understands e-bikes, and we got to pick your brain for an hour.
I
Uh,
really, it's changed. I'll tell you, we have two cars. We don't have an EV. I'm not necessarily against cars, but I've never been obsessed with cars at all. They're just
mhm,
kind of a means to get around.
mhm,
Once I got the e-bike, I really started to look at cars completely differently and realized, and I've been able to travel a lot too. We were just in Austria with my in December. And a wealthy country, people have cars. Cars are smaller. When we came back and we're on the road, I'm looking at these hulking, gigantic SUVs, usually with one person in them. And I'm thinking, what are we doing? And in Europe in general, in Asia, you see people on bikes all the time. And certainly the Netherlands, but plenty of countries, e-bikes are a big thing. And around here they are too. I think, and I imagine other cities, I imagine Portland, Boston, San Francisco, Seattle. There are places where e-bikes are big. And I can tell you around here, I see so many more than when I first bought mine. Just on the bike trails in the morning, more people are commuting this way. And it makes so much more sense. I think to myself when I'm sitting in traffic, if I do drive to work, why am I doing this?
mhm.
Sometimes because of weather, because something's going on. But I ride, as I tell people, I've ridden in temperatures as cold as about 22 degrees and as high as about 95.
Wow.
I do not, right now I'm looking out the window. There is snow on the lawn and everything. Hopefully it'll melt in the next week or two and I'll be back to biking to work once I get my bike looked at and fixed up a little bit with the chain and everything.
Yeah.
But really, I love it. And you don't even need, I mean, I wear a sweatshirt like this. I have a thermal undershirt and thermal tights, and I have a basic light jacket, and I have some heavy gloves, and a balaclava sometimes. It's not like I have really fancy bike gear even. You can dress plenty warm around here at least, and just dress in regular clothes. And I see people commuting in regular clothes. I'm not sure I would want to do that, especially because I've had a couple of spills, and I think to myself, ugh, to show up at work with ripped khakis or something, not a good, that won't
Not a
be,
good look. Not a good look.
oh,
Well, can certainly understand that. We're glad you're safe. We're glad you're well.
Thank
Please,
you.
please, stay that way. We need you.
Yeah. My husband periodically threatens to either hide the battery or cut the bike cables. I'm surprised he didn't do it after this. Because I mean, this was a more serious. I'm lucky. I really do consider myself
Yeah,
lucky that, I somehow was on the sidewalk and I'm like, what happened here? But my bike, again, really was not in bad shape. And
good.
so I am lucky. And I read of plenty of terrible bike accidents, including in this area where people have been killed because of bad drivers and sometimes bad cyclists. Cyclists make mistakes too. And,
Sure.
you have to be careful.
Well, thank
We
you.
all we all are on the road together or on the mixed use trail or sidewalk, and we have to be considerate of people, I think, is the bottom line.
I think that is great advice and a good way to end our discussion. Lee, thank you so
A
much.
pleasure. This was great.
We really do appreciate it. For those of us that are on here, know that this has been recorded. We will be posting it within the next 24 hours on our YouTube channel, and we will share that out. And we certainly appreciate if you would share that out. And speaking of sharing, by all means, if you are not already signed up for our e-newsletter, and I promise we will never send you any hair on fire emails. We will never send you, we need $5, any of those emails. We simply share updates. And to be honest, we'll be sharing some news and updates coming soon here. Obviously, as things change after January 20th. And we will be sharing some next steps, if you will, on that. So do sign up at buildtheera.com. Jan did put the address in the channel here to sign up for our e-newsletters. We do hope you'll keep in touch. We do hope you'll check out e-bikes, and we certainly do hope you'll keep safe out there. And Lee, thank you again, and thank you to everybody that joined us tonight. Have a good evening.
Thank all of you, and Happy New Year to everybody. Bike on. Bike on.
Bike on. On that note, have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.